inshallah we'll get started. نحمده ونصلي على رسول النبي الكريم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الصلاة والسلام عليك يا سيد المرسلين، يا خاتم النبيين، يا شفيع المذنبين، يا أنيس الغريبين، يا رحمة للعالمين. صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وسلم. Last week, we again continuing with the topic of Ahlul Bayt and continuing with the topic more specifically of Imam Husain AS and Karbala, and we spoke about the martyrdom of Imam Husain AS, or at least gotten to that point, and we'll continue with that today. There were some points that were brought up toward the end of the class, which I think are very important to reiterate. Those are things we've gone over before. We will go over again, and we will continue to go over as we talk about these subjects, because those are the points where people get very confused, and then you get people going off on extremes and deviating from what is proper. So, inshallah, the brother that was asking about those points, once he joins, we'll go into that at some point soon, inshallah. Continuing where we left off, basically, as far as what's been going on. And as you mentioned, of course, the battle of Karbala, Imam Husain AS, all of the household of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So you've joined, alhamdulillah. Yeah, so I'm going to I'll start off with the topic that we left last week with those points. First off, first thing to understand is that, everyone is biased. And so if someone says, no, I'm not biased, either he doesn't know what the word means, or he's lying. And even when we're looking at things, and especially when we're looking at things historically, I mean, you even, reading the Quran or the Hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, depending on the bias of the person, basically the background of that person, and the perspective of that person, the understanding or the meanings change. And some of those meanings are within the realm of proper, and some are not. And so history is even more so in that manner, because depending again on the background of the person, and this is why you can get two people looking at the same incident, but because their backgrounds are different, their biases are different, it changes how they narrate the incident and what they're seeing when they see the incident. And so that changes the whole perspective. Doesn't mean that one necessarily is lying about what he saw, it just, again, his perspective is different. Sometimes, yes, they are lying. And that's why it's important for us as Muslims, when we bias ourselves, we need to bias ourselves in accordance with Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And again, like as I said, history is something that's even more important in this. And the other important point here to understand is that history does not take precedence over the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam does not take precedence over the Quran. So, and there is in reality no contradiction between the Quran and the saying of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If I see a contradiction there, that's an issue with me. So I'm not biasing things in the proper manner. I'm not looking at things from the right perspective. Otherwise, the reality is, if it's a Sahih hadith, if it's actually what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said or did, there is no contradiction between what he said and did and what the Quran, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran. And so we also have to look at history in that same context. There are things that are narrated in the books of history which we know, okay, yeah, this contradicts everything that's in the Quran and everything that Rasulullah taught us, so we know this is, not proper, this is a lie. And then you have things that are kind of questionable. And then you have things that are totally in line with the Quran and the Sunnah. So those things that are totally in line are easy to detect. Those things that are way off are also easy to detect. But then you have things that are in the middle. And this is where most people get very confused. When we are talking about the Sahaba Ikram, when we're talking about Ahlul Bayt, when we're talking about the family of Rasulullah, when we're talking about his companions, we have to look at and see what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says and what Rasulullah says. So we went over an aspect of this last week in Ayat al-Tathir, which is verse number 33 of Surah number 33. Surah Ahzab, verse 33, the second half of that verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهَ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرَكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا. That it is only Allah's will, it is only Allah's intention that He should purify Ahlul Bayt, with such a purification, with a perfect purification. Right. So, and we know, and as we were just reiterating what we mentioned last week, when we look at this verse, when this verse was revealed, Rasulullah only called for 4 people: Ali, Fatima, Hassan, and Hussein alayhimus salam. These are the 4 he called. These are the 4 that he took under his cloak, and these are the ones for whom he said, Allahumma ha'ulahi ahli, that, oh Allah, only these are my family. So this, and every day after this verse was revealed, every morning, as he was going for Fajr Salat, he would stop by the door of Bibi Fatima and recite this verse and say that Allah has purified you. So you have to take this understanding, you have to keep that in mind. Also with Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajh. We know the hadith in Tirmizi, which is hadith where Rasulullah says that, oh Allah, turn truth in the direction of Ali. So whichever way Ali goes, the truth follows. And other Sahih narrations where he says that Ali is with the truth and the truth is with Ali. And of course, when we look at Imam Husain and Imam Husain AS, he says that these are my flowers. They are Sayyidul Shabab al-Ahlul Jannah. These are the leaders of the youth of Jannah. These aren't titles he's just throwing upon them because they're his household. Yes, they're his household, but they're his household for a reason. These are the ones Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created for him, from him. And then he also says that my Ahlul Bayt is like Safinatul Nuh. It is like the Ark of Nuh alayhi salam. And he doesn't stop here, just Safinatul Nuh and that's it. He says whoever gets on, whoever holds fast to this Ark, he is saved, and whoever abandons him is lost. So, all of this has to be taken into consideration when we're, and kept in mind when we're speaking about Ahlul Bayt. So, because there are people, when they see someone who's from this lineage and he's doing something wrong, they say, oh, he's also Sayyid, so how can I respect him? Well, Rasulullah also drew the analogy, and not just the analogy, he said that my household, the Quran and my household will always be together until they come and meet me at the Hawd on the Day of Judgment. So when we look at the Quran, there are verses in the Quran that are abrogated, mansukh. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this in verse 106 of Surah Baqarah. ما ننسخ من آية أو ننسها نأتي بخير منها أو مثلها ألم تعلم أن الله على كل شيء قدير. That there are verses here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala abrogates, and He replaces something with but even if I look at an abrogated verse of the Quran, I still have to honor and respect the verse because it's part of the Quran. So the same way, when I look at some Sayyid who's not or practicing Islam properly, but his non-practice doesn't take him to the point of kufr, I still have to honor and respect him. Just like I have to honor and respect the verses of the Quran that are also abrogated. I don't follow those verses, I can't practice those verses, but I still have to honor those verses. So, on the flip side, you have those who claim to be Sayyid today. And yet when they speak, their language is the same as Banu Umayyah, or those who they defend Yazid and side with Yazid, yet they claim to be Sayyid. You know, this is like when Nuh alayhi salam's son refused to get on the ark. So if you've abandoned the ark, if you've abandoned the ship, well, then you're lost. But he says about the companions, about his companions, Rasulullah says, he says that my companions are like the stars. And if you follow any one of them, you will be guided. So when you're on the boat, how do you navigate? You use the stars to navigate, right? However, if you're not even on the boat, the stars, navigating by the stars doesn't matter because the sharks are going to eat you anyway. You have to be on the boat in order to be safe, and then you use the stars to help navigate you. But you have stars that will tell you, okay, this is the direction you go in, but you also have stars that will tell you, okay, you don't go this way. You look at this star and you say, okay, I know I don't go this way, I go this way. Again, he draws that analogy to the stars. So this is where people say, they try to reject this hadith of Rasulullah by saying, see, such and such companion did this, and such companion did this. So now we have to try to first off understand what is a companion, what is a sahabi. A sahabi is someone who accepted Islam, who saw Rasulullah with iman, and he dies on that iman. Okay. So, because there were people who accepted Islam, they saw Rasulullah and yet they apostated, or they died as hypocrites, which is another form of apostation, but it's not open. So there were people like this. They are not Sahabi, because they did not die on the iman that they saw Rasulullah with, and here they didn't even die with iman. But here also, again, there were people who late in the time of Rasulullah came, accepted Islam, and saw him, and then when he passed away, they apostated, and then when Abu Bakr did the Ridda Wars, they came back into Islam. Again, they are no longer Sahabi, because they will die with an iman that they did not see Rasulullah with. So that's an important point to note that most people don't mention at all, unfortunately. But that's an important point to note here. Okay. The other aspect of this, though, is when he says that, if you follow them, you'll be rightly guided. Okay. Rasulullah is our guide. He tells us which way to go. We cannot practice everything he did. And there is no way we can practice everything he did the way he did it. This is why when he talks about salat, he didn't say pray as you see me praying. He didn't say pray as I pray. He says pray as you see me praying. Because we can't pray like he prayed. That's an impossibility.
Fasting.
The same thing, brother brings up the good point of the fasting. And the hadiths are in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim, where Rasulullah would fast continuously, without any break, for 40 days. No food, no water. And when the companions tried to emulate him after 3 days, they couldn't even get up. And he said, what are you doing? They said, Ya Rasulullah, we see you doing like this, so we want to copy you, because of our love for you, we want to copy you. And his response in Sahih Bukhari is what? Ayyukum mithli? Are you like me? Which means you're not like me. And he goes on to explain that we're not like him. Because he says, I am with my Lord, and he gives me food and drink. Not the food and drink of this world, but that spiritual food, and that's what sustains him. So again, he's not like us. So, and also we can't follow him because he is perfection upon perfection. We are not. He is sinless. He is Masoom. He is not just a Masoom, he is Sayyidul Masoomin, and this is what we spoke about this past Friday when we talk about the verses of Surah Fath. لَيَغْفِرَ لَكَ اللَّهُ مَا تَقَدَّمَ مِنْ ذَنْبِكَ وَمَا تَأَخَّرَ. So that we may, for your sake, not for you, for your sake, forgive the sins of those of the past and those of the future. Who? The sins that have been committed against him before, and the sins that people would commit later. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is forgiving the sins of the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for him, because of his intercession, because of the connection to him sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then people say, and this is one thing I forgot to mention this Friday, I'll mention it this coming Friday, but I'll mention it today as well, is, this is an example people try to give. See, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he used to make astaghfar over, 100 times every day, so we need to make it even more. And the implication there is like he's making astaghfar because of some sin, astaghfirullah. Because, it's interesting when you talk about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, people's vocabulary becomes very narrow. So the only reason you do istighfar is because you sinned, which is not true. That is not why, in his situation, he's doing istighfar how? Because his status is being increased at every moment. And even though his status is being increased at every moment, we don't even know the beginning of his status, much less how it's being increased. So every moment it's increasing, he looks back at the status before, and he does astaghfar from the status that he was on, and now he's on a new status. New maqam. So constantly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is raising his maqam. And again, we don't even know where his maqam begins, much less where his maqam is. So this is why it's very, we can't follow him in that sense, because we make mistakes, we sin. So this is where we follow the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They made mistakes. They are mahfuz. They are not masoom. They are protected. They made mistakes, but then they made tawbah. So we follow them in that tawbah. How did they make the tawbah? And the easiest example of this, most to give, you have, the companion, the female companion of Rasulullah who committed zina. And she comes to Rasulullah and says, Ya Rasulullah, I did this. He gives her an excuse. She goes the other side, and he turns his face and gives her an excuse. She goes to the other side, witnesses against herself again, and says, no, that excuse isn't valid, and then he gives her another excuse. Same thing on the other side, and then another excuse. After she witnesses against herself 4 times, then he says, fine, when the baby is born, come back. She goes, baby's born, she comes back. Now what does he say? He says, okay, fine, now nurse the baby. 2 years later, she comes back after nursing the baby. Then he says, okay, now find somebody to take care of him after you. So she finds an older woman from her family who's willing to take care of this child and brings her. And then he says, okay, let's go. They go to the outskirts of Medina Munawwara, and of course she was married when she committed the act. So the punishment is rajam, it is stoning to death. So as they're stoning her, some of her blood splashes on the clothes of Khalid bin Walid, radiallahu anhu. And he makes a comment, he says, the blood of this adulteress has stained my clothes. And Rasulullah says, don't say like that, because I am the messenger of Allah, and I see her in Jannah, swimming in the rivers of Jannah. And if her repentance was distributed over all of the people of Medina Munawwara, they would all be forgiven. We have various other examples of various other companions who made mistakes, but they made the tawbah, so that's how we follow them. Because again, we make mistakes, but we should look at them and see how did they correct their mistakes. This is how we are following them. This is how this hadith is still valid. Under all of these conditions, under everything that the companions did. This is also where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says that none of my companions will be touched by the fire. This doesn't mean that they will all be so pious. No, they are pious in the sense that they all, when they made a mistake, they made ruju, they made tawbah. You know, but not in the sense that they didn't make mistakes. But this is the authority of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that even with all of their shortcomings, you know, because if they were all, oh, no one made any mistake and they all go to the fire, okay, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said none of them will go to the fire, so they all, didn't make any mistakes. But that's not how it works. This again is the authority of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that even with all of their shortcomings, with all of the issues that will come up, if they are his companions, if they die on the iman that they saw him with, then they will not be touched by the fire because of him, because of his statement. And this gets back to وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears. Because again, as I mentioned on Friday, the lam here, according to Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajh, is qasam. Like, لَا أُقْسِمُ بِهَذَا الْبَلَدِ. So the same lam here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is swearing that, that soon I will give you so much that you will be pleased with me. Saying this to his Habib, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again doesn't need to please any of us. He doesn't need to please anyone. He is the creator, he is Allah. But this is his love for Rasulullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he says that I will give you so much you will be pleased. And what was the response of Rasulullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam? He said, I will not be pleased until every one of my ummah goes to Jannah. And we know from the other hadith that he will be taking people out of the fire and taking them to Jannah. But the companions, he said, they won't even be touched by the fire. And so when we look at Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, and we mentioned last week about, he agreed to these terms of Imam Husain AS, but he was not able to fulfill the terms. So just because he didn't fulfill the terms doesn't take him out of the rank of Sahabi. And I'll come back to that point in a second. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said to Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajh, he said, you will fight against the oath breakers, the rebellious, and the deviants. And so we see this, that he fought against those who broke the oath in the Battle of the Camel, in Jamal. Because you have on the other side, you have Zubair bin Awam and Talha bin Ubaidullah, radiallahu anhuma, who are Ashir al-Mubashira. They aren't just anybody. These are Ashir al-Mubashira. They had given an oath. They were in Medina Munawwara when Ali is taking the oath of Khilafah, and they gave the oath. Then they came to Makkah to give the news to Bibi Aisha Siddiqa radiallahu of what's going on. And then while they're there, the news comes that Ali is refusing to take revenge for Uthman, blood for Uthman. And so they join her in that march, and they end up coming and in the army that is against his army. We also know how they made tawbah. We've talked about this before. I'm going to reiterate it now. In the middle of the battle, because the battle of the Camel took place at night, which was not the norm. So just knowing that tells you that something unusual happened. And what happened? You had people, hypocrites who had infiltrated both camps, and in the middle of the night they attacked one side saying that Ali sent us, and they attacked the other side saying that Aisha sent us, and the war begins. The battle begins. And in the middle of that, Ali radiallahu sees Zubair bin Awam radiallahu, and he says to him, he says that, remember when Rasulullah sallallahu said that today, because they were cousins, they are cousins, they were playing one day, and Rasulullah says today they play and one day they will fight and Ali will be on the truth. And he reminds him of that. And he immediately asks Sayyidina Ali karamallahu, he says, what should I do? You command me what to do. And Ali tells him, he says, leave the battlefield. And he left, and he's followed by some other hypocrites who eventually catch up with him, and in condition of salat, they kill him. He's martyred. Talha bin Ubaidullah, when Marwan bin Hakam sees that he's backing off from the battle because he realizes what's going on, so now he's pulling away, Marwan shoots him with an arrow and kills him. Marwan's in that same army. So again, them violating that oath didn't take them out of the status of Sahabi. And does not, and so we are still obligated to honor and respect them. So, coming back to, and also when he said rebellious, the rebellious, again, yeah, they were rebellious, but that does not take them out of Islam. Battle of Siffin. And then you have Nahwan, which is the deviants. Yeah, they already deviated out of Islam. That's why they're deviants. So that's a whole different issue there. But when we're talking about Sahabi, again, the Sahabi make mistake, but they also make tawbah for their mistakes. So when we talk about Muawiyah, as we mentioned last week, Imam Husain al-Islam, he gave him 5, basically the narration is say Muslim and in Bukhari, where the army of Imam Husain al-Islam is marching towards Sham. Muawiyah is sitting with Amr bin al-As radiallahu anhu, and they see this army coming, and Muawiyah asks Amr, he says, if we fight, what will happen? He says, many will die. So then he calls 2 men that were Sahabi that were in his army. If you look at the Battle of Siffin, all of the Sabiqun al-Awwalun companions who fought in that battle were all in the army of Ali. All of the ones who were in the army of Muawiyah were companions who had accepted Islam after Fatih Makkah. All of the early companions were in the army of Ali who took place in this battle. To the extent that Sultan Tabi'in, Uwais Qarni is also in the army of Ali and is martyred in this battle. Same thing when we see Imam Husain al-Islam. All of the elder companions who are taking place in these battles are always with Imam Husain al-Islam. Only those who accepted Islam later would be in the army of Muawiyah radiallahu anhu. So when they see this, he makes this comment, so he calls for 2 companions, both of whose names were Abdul Rahman. And he gives them a blank piece of paper and it sends them to Imam Husain al-Islam and says, say that we're willing to accept any terms, but the condition was that he becomes the ruler. And so in Bukhari, the way Imam Bukhari mentions the hadith, he says that, they came and they had a discussion and terms were agreed upon, and then he doesn't mention the discussion, he doesn't mention the terms. And he does this because of the time that he's writing. He knows that if he writes everything down, he will either be killed or his writings will be destroyed because of the political pressures. We see the writings in various other narrations in Mustadrak and all of these with the same narrators as to the details of what was discussed. And so we see this, so as I mentioned 5 conditions that Imam Husain al-Islam laid down. And some books mention 6. But the 5 that I mentioned, first of all, the first condition is that you will rule according to the Quran and the Sunnah and the way of the Khulfa Rashidin. But even before he gives these conditions, he says, who will guarantee these conditions? Imam Husain al-Islam, he's saying this knowing full well what's coming. He says, who will guarantee these conditions? How do I know the conditions will be fulfilled? And these 2 say, we will guarantee the conditions. He says, fine, even though he knows what's coming. So first condition, Quran and Sunnah. Second condition, cursing of Sayyidina Ali Karamallah wajh. And here, as I mentioned last week, he compromised. He said, okay, fine. He says, I can only speak for myself. Imam Husain AS says, okay, fine. Third condition, no retaliation against those who are the supporters of Ali and Hassan alayhi salam. Fourth was that the appointees, the governors, the generals, anyone that was appointed by Muawiyah had no authority over Ahlul Bayt. And then the fifth was that Muawiyah had no authority to appoint anyone in his place. And that after him, the decision would come back to the Shura or to Imam Husain AS. And so Muawiyah agrees to all of this, and Imam Husain AS, walks away. So this in itself tells me that Imam Husain AS acknowledges Muawiyah as a Muslim, as a believer, as a Sahabi, because he saw Rasulullah, so he acknowledges him as a believer. He does. Otherwise, he would not hand over the rule of the Muslims to a non-believer. Even when Imam Husain AS is martyred by poisoning, we look at, so basically around 56 Hijri. So 40 Hijri is when this agreement takes place. We know, there were various violations of the terms. 56 Hijri, Imam Husain AS is martyred. And this is also when Yazid is named as the, crown prince, the heir apparent. You have 5 companions, as I mentioned, who objected vocally, aggressively. Abdul Rahman bin Abu Bakr, Abdullah ibn Umar, Abdullah ibn Zubair, Abdullah ibn Abbas, and Imam Hussein radiallahu anhu. These 5 objected immediately. However, Imam Husain AS continues to honor the terms on behalf of Ahlul Bayt that his brother had given. And so that also tells me that he acknowledges Muawiyah as a believer. Simply, he's not doing what is proper. So he is still Sahabi. When we look now, when he's about to pass, and these are things that we've talked about, but when he's about to pass, and this is something that is mentioned in the books, but most people don't mention it. The Shia don't mention it because it gives some credibility. It gives credibility to Muawiyah. The lovers of Yazid don't mention it because it basically negates all of their arguments in support of Yazid being the king. Because if you listen to their speeches or their writings, one of the biggest things is, Muawiyah appointed him, and Muawiyah was a Sahabi. But again, Sahabi can make mistake. Because if you look at the people that are objecting to this, they are also Sahabi. And they aren't just any Sahabi, they are very well-respected, high-level authority Sahabi that are objecting to this. So when I look now, so on his deathbed, Muawiyah, he mentions a few things. One is he dictates that he should be buried in one of the sheets of Rasulullah that he had acquired. That should be his coffin. He had acquired some of the blessed hair of Rasulullah. He said that those should be placed in his mouth. And he had acquired some of the nail clippings of Rasulullah, and he said those should be placed in his eyes, so that perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will look upon him with mercy. Even though he is Sahabi, he is Katibul Wahi, not in the sense that he wrote, that Rasulullah dictated the Quran to him, but Rasulullah did dictate a letter to him that he had sent. So he is Katibul Wahi from that standpoint. He is the brother-in-law of Rasulullah because his sister, Habiba, is the wife of Rasulullah. He's not looking at any of these things, to attain any forgiveness or the mercy of Allah, but he's looking to those things that are connected to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But at the same time, he also withdraws the nomination of Yazid. Yazid wasn't there at that moment. Other advisors were there. And of course, this withdrawal of the nomination is not pushed by these advisors because of the political situation. And so basically, things were too far gone. Even though he is withdrawing the nomination, he is making tawbah from this nomination. But it's too late from that standpoint. So, Islamically, as I mentioned last week, I cannot blame the father for the actions of the son. Just like we cannot blame Nuh alayhi salam for the actions of his son. We cannot blame Muawiyah radhiyallahu anhu for the actions of Yazid. We cannot blame Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas radhiyallahu anhu for the actions of his son Amr. So these are all, when we bias ourselves looking at this history, we have to keep all of this in mind. And otherwise, again, we will deviate and start, talking bad about, some companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam or so and this, and why didn't he do this? And you have people on both sides, those who attack Muawiyah and those, but you also, a scholar in the past gave me a book, and he would give me books written by people on the opposite side. He gave me one book. He said, read this.
Like the Jewish also, they always go against us, debates why it's not happened, why this happened.
Yes, yeah.
So what's the difference between us and Jew?
Yeah. So why this, why that? I'll come to a funny point on that in a second. So in that book, that guy is he was talking about the Khilafah of Ali and the steps that he took, and he's always challenging, why did Ali do this? He should have done this. Why did he do this instead of this? Ali didn't do anything except under the command of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there are many things that happened even during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that you would think normally shouldn't have happened, but they happened because they were lessons for us. If they hadn't happened, then we would not learn the lessons. Basic example of that is the Battle of Uhud. The Battle of Uhud is a treasure trove of lessons for the Ummah. If what happened in Uhud had not happened, and the Muslims had continued to be victorious every time, overwhelmingly victorious like they were in Badr, so many lessons we couldn't learn. And then when, trials and tribulations would come today, then there would be no example for us to follow. So the same thing here in Karbala. This is a lesson and something that gives us strength. I've mentioned Nelson Mandela many times. What kept him going? He himself says what kept him going and eventually made him successful in his campaign to overturn the oppression that was going on in his land was the example of Imam Husain AS. Because he said he was on the verge of signing everything over. He was ready to do it, but then he remembered Hussein AS and his sacrifice. So, but again, we don't want to be remembering the sacrifice of Imam Husain AS and then violating all of the ones that Rasulullah SAW wants us to honor and respect. And this is all, all of this is, again, the way we have to bias ourselves when we're looking at this history, when we're hearing the history, and we know, and we should, and understanding these aspects, when we see someone who's talking out of that realm, then we know, okay, yeah, he either doesn't know what he's talking about or he's trying to mislead people. So these, again, important points to note. And I think for the most part I've covered everything I can think of at the moment. I'm sure I've left out several things. But the funny note there was, like these guys, the brother was mentioning, like like the Jews, they'll always, or the Christians, when they talk about Islam, they'll mention these things and kind of try to say, oh, why did they do this, or why didn't they do that? And he says, well, the Muslims are doing the same thing. So it's kind of, when the British started coming to the subcontinent, they sent, when they gained a decent foothold, so they started sending their missionaries, and Muslim scholars would debate them. And one of the debates, one of the Christians, he says to, he gets up and he says his spiel, and then he says that if Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is the beloved of Allah, then how come Karbala happened? Why didn't Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam simply go to Allah and say, oh Allah, my grandson? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have protected his grandson. So the Muslim scholar, he said, well, so he responds to him. He says, yes, actually the Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did. He's saying it sarcastically, of course, but he said, yeah, he did. He did. So, he's suddenly, and he just stops there. He says, yeah, he did. And the Christian scholar, of course, wasn't expecting that, and all of a sudden he's in shock. Wait. So when he hears this, and now, there's silence, he says he did, and he stops. So now, the Christian missionary, he starts saying, well, then what happened? What happened? He says, well, he went to him, and he says, oh Allah, my grandson, and God started crying. What do you mean God started? He said, God started crying. God said, I couldn't save my own son. How can I save your grandson? So, kind of ended the debate right there. Yeah. So people bring up stupid issues, or rather they create stupid issues. Again, if Imam Husain AS had not done what he'd done, and we're going to go over this later on, you have so many people that followed his example, they could not have done what they had done. Abdullah ibn Zubair, all of the revolutions, all the revolts that will come after Karbala. And even today, we see what's going on in the Muslim world. If we truly understand the sacrifice of Imam Husain AS, then, and those are those verses of Surah Baqarah that we keep talking about, verses 152 through 157. Which deal with this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us already that you will be tested. And so when he tells us that we will be tested, and he says in the end, وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ, glad tidings to those who are patient, we have to have an example. And what a better example than the household of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. There is no better example than the household of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Just like there is no better household than the household of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Any points on what I've mentioned so far? So we'll continue from where I left off last week. Which was where Imam Husain AS is eventually martyred in the condition of sajda of Asr Salat. And this is one of the reasons that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears by Asr, and we went over this last week. Wal Asr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is swearing by the time of Asr. This is that time in which Imam Husain al-Islam himself is martyred. The grandson, literally the blood of Rasulullah is spilt. So, which is, a big deal. As I mentioned before, when guidance is taken out of the heart, there are no limits as far as the atrocities people will commit. And so after they have killed him, so Shimr comes, he beheads him, and as they're doing all of this, just remember, keep in mind, as they're doing all of this, what are they saying? They're saying Allahu Akbar. So Allahu Akbar. Then they start going, the army, they start beheading the rest of them. Because the custom had become that, after you fulfilled your mission to, kill someone, then you would send the head of the people that you killed to the king as proof of what you have done. And so they start beheading them and putting their heads on the spear. At the same time, so you have several things going on at the same time. At the same time, they have the tents of the women that were in of the household of Rasulullah SAW. They light them up, throw fire on them, so they're forced out of the tents. Imam Zain al-Abidin, who again, as we mentioned last week, is very sick. He has to come out in that condition. They take the horses and they run over the bodies of those that have been martyred. So not only do they decapitate all of them, they mutilate the bodies as well. And this is why Imam Husain al-Islam buried Imam Ali Asghar. So Imam Ali Asghar, as we mentioned, was 6 months old. He's the only one that he buried. The rest of them, he would bring them back to the tents and lay them there. But Ali Asghar is the only one that he buried because, if they had run over him with the horses, there would be nothing left. So they mutilate the bodies by running their horses over them. Again, no guidance, no limits. Islam gives us boundaries. So after they've done all of this mutilation, decapitation, the women are forced out. Bibi Zainab, the sister of Imam Husain al-Islam, she comes to her brother's body, and she, is crying, and she looks toward Medina Munawwara, and she says, Ya Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is Hussein, who is laying here in his own blood. And, so they're about to execute Imam Zain al-Abidin as well. Bibi Zainab intervenes or intercedes on his behalf, and eventually Amr bin Sa'd, Shimr wants to execute him right there, and Amr says, he's sick, what's he going to do? And then, so eventually they don't execute him. Because their true goal was Imam Husain al-Islam. And once they've met their goal, now it's like, okay, whatever. And so he was their objective, to kill him or to force him to give allegiance to Yazid. Of course, which he was not going to do. He was not going to give allegiance to Yazid. He would rather give his head than his hand to Yazid. And so this is what is going on in Karbala. So the news of the events of Karbala arrive in Mecca and Medina immediately. Normally news would take a couple of weeks at least to get from there, from Karbala to Medina, would take at least a couple of weeks. It arrived immediately, and the news bearer was no one other than Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself. So if you remember, the wife of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Bibi Salma, radiallahu anha, in whose house that meeting took place between Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Jibreel and the angel of rain, and to whom Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had handed over the sand from the field of Karbala, which she had wrapped in her cloth to begin with and then transferred to a jar later on. So she is the only wife of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam who is still alive at that time. And so she at that time is in this state of meditation, and she sees Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when she sees him with dust in his hair, and in a condition that she had never seen him before. And so she asked, she said, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what has happened that I see you in this condition? And he says to her, he says that they have killed or they have martyred my son Hussein in Karbala. And so when she comes out of the state, she immediately goes and looks at that jar, and the sand in there has turned to blood. At the same time, Abdullah ibn Abbas, radiallahu anhu, who is in Mecca, he also sees the same thing. He sees Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam giving him this news. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in giving the news to the two of them, he says to them, he says, I am coming from Karbala. I am coming from there. And so they see this, and so that they immediately, the people there now know what's happened. So this was the 10th of Muharram, and then they are, the next day, all of the prisoners, so the women are all shackled. They are all, basically shackled and paraded around like common prisoners. And no one was allowed to come close to them, and whenever anybody would ask, who are these people, they would be told, oh, these are the enemies of the state. These are people that rebelled against the state. And so eventually by the 12th they arrive in Kufa, and then short stay there, a few days there, and then from Kufa they are sent to Damascus. And I'm going to go over some of those details probably next time. Well, I'll go over some of those now. So when they arrive in Kufa, Ibn Ziyad, of course, the governor. The history of Ibn Ziyad is, I guess, his lineage history is interesting. If somebody wants to look that up, I'm not going to go over that, but if someone wants to look that up and discuss it with me later on, we can go over that later. His lineage is questionable, let me put it that way. But so they, at this point, as I said, the people in Mecca and Medina find out, and in Medina Munawwara immediately some of the companions head out for Karbala. So they immediately head out to see what's happened. The other thing that happens is that a couple of days later, there are people from Banu Asad, one of the clans that was close by. They will come and they will bury the bodies. So, they killed them, beheaded them, mutilated them, and then just left them. And so eventually, after a couple of days, the people would come and they would bury them. So again, we look at this and we draw all of these analogies to everything that we're seeing going on today. Same thing, same mindset, and so it should not be a shock to us. But people are still surprised. They say, "Where is the humanity?" Humanity does not exist unless there is some guidance in the heart. And again, when that guidance is taken away, no limits. So when the captives, and I say that with hesitation, because the normal thought of captives is somebody who's been caught for a crime. These are people who are captives whose only crime was to stand up for what is right and true, to stand up for the truth. That was their only crime. Just like even today, like even in this country, well, what is the crime of those people that are being cracked down upon? They're not even doing anything. They're just sitting there. They're sitting there, just questioning the authority of those violating the truth. And those who are being questioned, they can't even have that. Again, not even doing anything. So here they understood, the authority understood that, Imam Husain AS questioning them was proof that they are not on the truth. Because he is on the truth. And if he's questioning something, then that means that's deviation. So they can't even have someone questioning their authority. So when they arrive, these honored captives, of course, they arrive in the court, like prisoners, and as I said, they're being run around throughout the city like prisoners of war. And so, first off, the head of Imam Husain AS is brought, and in his ziyad, he takes a stick and he hits the lips of Imam Husain AS. And he has to, while he's doing this, he has to acknowledge that he's never seen anyone more handsome than him. He has to acknowledge that. Again, this is the blood of Rasulullah. One thing, going back to what we had mentioned before, that is an important point here, is the honor of everything is directly connected to its connection to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why are we the best of ummah, the best nation? Because we are the nation of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. No other reason. Why is the Quran the best of books? It is the word of Allah, but so was the Torah, so was the Zabur, so was the Injil. But this is the book that was revealed to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is the book that will not be changed because of its connection to him sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Again, it is Kalamullah. Yes, it's the word of Allah, but the Torah was also the word of Allah. Yet He subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed it to be changed on this earth. Why are the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam the best of companions? Because again, they are his companions sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why is the household of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam the best of households? Because it is his household. Anything that is connected to him becomes something that is honored and must be respected. To the extent that even the shoes of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if someone disrespects the shoes of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that in itself is kufr. If someone is disrespectful to the lace, a broken lace of the shoe of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he becomes kafir. So these are the things, you know, like even when we talk about like the shirt of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We know from the hadith in Bukhari that Bibi Aisha said after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Bibi Aisha Siddiqa radhiyallahu, she kept one of his shirts. And whenever anybody was sick in Medina Munawwara, they would come to her with some water. She would pour it on the shirt and then wrench the water out, and they would drink the water, and Allah would give them cure. And then after her, that shirt was passed on to her sister, Asma, radiallahu anha. And the same thing, just the shirt of Rasulullah being so honored. Why? The shirt of Rasulullah is not from Rasulullah. Simply the connection that he wore it. When we look at the blessed hair of Rasulullah, so as we talked about Ma'aviyah, what did he say? He said, place that in those in my mouth and the nail clippings in my eyes, that may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala look upon me with his mercy. Okay. So these are again things, but what about the ones that are the blood of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? When we look at, you know, Bibi Fatima salamullah alayha, he says that she is part of me. Badatu minni. She is part of me. There is nothing that is greater than, nothing in creation that is greater than even a part of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is why Imam Malik rahmatullah alayhi, he says, you know, as far as the issue of fazilat, of afzaliyat, who is greatest, he says that after the prophets, Bibi Fatima salamullah alayhi is the greatest, even above Abu Bakr and Ali, because he said, and his argument for that is not something you can argue against, because he says, how can I compare anyone even to a part of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And Imam Hassan and Imam Husain AS, again, they are his blood. They are the ones who said that these are my flowers. They are the flowers of my garden. So to come against them in this manner, again, is disbelief. This is why this whole army of Yazid that came against Imam Husain AS, they had no iman. Even though there were many of them who were hafiz of Quran, they didn't forget the Quran. They still hafiz of Quran.
Just like that. Some people, they are bigger than Rasulullah sallam. When they come to close, automatic, Rasulullah sallam goes heighter more than him. So ibadat also same thing like that. There is no comparison.
Yeah, there's no comparison here.
There is no comparison. Yeah. Anything.
I mean, there is no comparison here. Yeah. So again, so even though you have these people that are hafiz of Quran, qadis, you know, all of these scholars and stuff, anyone who came against Imam Husain Aslam, and this gets to that verse of the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about, you know, lowering your voice below the voice of Rasulullah. Otherwise, what? أَن تَحْبَتَ أَعْمَالُكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَشْعُرُونَ. That I will wipe away your deeds, you won't even know it. Means there is no tawbah for you. That door just closed. And this is why it's so significant that Imam Husain al-Islam, before Karbala, before the 10th, from the 2nd to the 10th, is going before this army, and every day, multiple times a day, telling them who he is. So they can't say later on, oh, we didn't know who he was. So even here again, Ibn Ziyad, when he sees the head of Imam Husain al-Islam, and this is like 2 days after he's been martyred, and he has to acknowledge he's never seen anyone as handsome as him. And yet he has the audacity to take a stick and hit the lips of Imam Husain al-Islam. And one of the elder companions, I'm blanking on exactly who it was Anas bin Malik, or one of the others, who, when he sees this, he says that, he curses Ibn Ziyad, and he says that I saw the lips of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam kissing these lips. How can you do this? And Ibn Ziyad's response to him, he says that if you weren't an old man, I would have you killed right here. And so after, as I said, after a few days stay there, they will eventually be sent to Damascus, because they need to give the king the proof that they fulfilled his mission, fulfilled his commands, and so that they can attain the rewards that they were promised. So Ibn Ziyad is promised that he will be made the governor not just of Basra but also of Kufa. Amr bin Saad is promised the governorship of Ray. All these other generals are promised various other promotions. And for those who try to excuse Yazid that, oh, he was upset, well, if he was so upset, then why did he not stop any of these promotions? If he was upset, he would have held some of the promotions. He didn't. They were all given their promotions. But their promotions won't do them any good, because within a few years they will all be dead. And so roughly around the 1st of Safar, so 10th of Muharram is when he's martyred. Around the 1st of Safar, this caravan or this procession arrives in Damascus. On the way, when they leave Kufa, they are avoiding any of the big cities because they don't want too much attention drawn to them. And the question is, who gave the women the scarves? That's going to come later. That won't come until Damascus. Because again, they're being paraded around like common prisoners of war. So, their head scarves or dresses, not scarves, but they didn't wear scarves. They wore, the shawl that they covered the whole body with. And so those are all have been pulled off. They are shackled, hands and feet. And this is how they're proceeding from Kufa, first from Karbala to Kufa, and now from Kufa all the way to Damascus. So this trip will take, 2+ weeks to make. On the way, as I said, they are avoiding any of the big cities. So they're going, because, if they go to the bigger cities, people will question, who are they? And when people start realizing who they are, that's going to cause issues for the leadership. They stopped by a church. There was a church on the path, and they stopped close to that one night. And Imam Husain AS, even in this condition, is reciting the Quran. Again, proof that the martyrs don't die. And it is his obligation to do this because of his status. So even on, he is the one who recited the Quran in every condition, even on the tip of the spear. Literally on the tip of the spear, because that's how the heads are being paraded through, is they're being carried on the tips of the spears. And it's interesting, one scholar says that even now Imam Husain AS is above everybody else. Even in this condition, he's above everybody else. And so when they stop at the church, the priest, when he saw them coming, he saw this nur, this light emanating, and he knew that something was special. And so he somehow came and got permission. He bribed some of the soldiers to allow him to keep the head of Imam Husain Islam in the church that night that they were spending there, and he did. And then that priest will also become Muslim. So Imam Husain Islam is also the one not only reciting the Quran on the tip of the spear, giving da'wah and calling people into Islam even in this condition. And so eventually they will arrive in Damascus, and before being brought to the court of or, you know, I hate using the term court, but, you know, because court is something that's supposed to be something elevated. But, you know, I guess when I put the claimer of Yazid, then you understand the court of Yazid. So in the court of Yazid, they parade them around town. The whole, you know, basically show, oh, these are the prisoners. These are the enemies of the state. This is anybody who would ask, these are the enemies of the state. No one is allowed close to them, but these are the enemies of the state. The enemies of the state. And this, because this is also a warning that if you're an enemy of the state, this is what your lot's going to be. You're going to end up like this. And so they go and they parade around, eventually coming to close to the court. And now, you know, because, you know, the king is the king. The king waits on nobody. Everybody has to wait on the king. So Yazid makes them wait outside before being brought in. And so this gets to the question that was being asked about the person who brings them sheets to cover with. So when they do this, there's an old Abyssinian woman who, when she sees this procession coming out, you know, she sees all these women who haqq, or truth, has this nur. It has this light, you know. And the light is something that you are naturally attracted to. This is why even the enemies of Rasulullah were attracted to him. They would come and want to listen to him, even though, you know, they would not accept him. That was a different issue. But they were that natural attraction toward the truth. And so when she sees this, she recognizes this. And this woman who at this point was very old, she was Abyssinian. She had lived in Medina Munawwara. Her name was Fidda. And she had not just lived in Medina Munawwara, she had lived in the house of Bibi Fatima Salamullah alayha. You know, last couple of years, she served in the house of the daughter of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But after the passing of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and actually after the passing of Bibi Fatima Salamullah alayha, who had passed 6 months after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he left and she came towards Sham, even though she's originally from Abyssinia. You know, this is when Sham was being opened up to the Muslims. So she came toward Sham, and eventually she settles in Damascus. So when she sees these women and she sees, you know, the condition that they're being brought in, so she goes to her house and she gets some sheets and she brings them to them. And she starts talking to Bibi Zainab. And she tells Zainab who she is. And she says while she's talking to Zainab, you know, she finds out that she is from. She doesn't know who the name is. She just, you know, she's attracted to her. She had seen her when she was a very small child. Is when Bibi Fatima Salamullah alayha passed away, you know, Imam Husain AS at that time was 6 or 7 at the most. Zainab, his sister, was probably around 5. And so she asked Zainab, she said, where are you from? And she said, we're coming from Medina. And then, she says that I used to live there. And after giving the she's talking to them. She says, I used to live there. And she starts telling about herself. And then she says, I used to serve in the house of the daughter of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so I wanted to know, what has happened to Zainab, to Hussein and Zainab. And so Bibi Zainab alayhi salam, she says to her, she says, I am Zainab, and the one, on the spear, that is the head of Imam Husain AS. And inshallah, we'll pick up from here next week. Next weekend is the Memorial Day weekend. Unless nobody will be able to attend, inshallah, we'll have class. But I'll go into this a little bit more detail about this meeting between Fidda and Imam Bibi Zainab radiallahu anha, as well as the because what Fidda does in the court of Yazid, she will follow them into the court, will be a turning point as far as the attitudes of some of the soldiers of Yazid. And so, and it will be that moment when many people start to wake up, and then we'll see that shift in the superficial attitude of Yazid as well. So I'll end here today, inshallah. We'll continue from here, and may Allah, are there any questions? Any questions so far, or points? So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to understand and allow us to truly love Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, as well as truly love His Habib sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and His family, His companions, and all of those whom they love, and may He allow us to know them and to understand them, and may He give protection and victory to our brothers and sisters in Gaza and Palestine and Sudan and Kashmir and wherever and everywhere the Muslims are being oppressed, and may He give guidance to those who are the oppressors. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.